what should be posed to Somalia and other states in the region is you're not going to force Somaliland back into your orbit unless they want to be in your orbit, which basically means you have to perform better. You have to perform better than Somaliland. If you want unity, you have to make the Somalilanders see that you have outperformed them. At this point in time, Somaliland is either outperforming or laying the groundwork to outperform many other regional states. In many ways, it reminds me a bit of Rwanda. Out of genocide, I mean, tremendous, tremendous progress. One other point I'd like to make just on the national security and defense front. And obviously I'm speaking with an American perspective, but realistically, the United States, first of all, US policy traditionally is reactive. For the past 25 years, I can't say we've had a proactive strategy. That's not a Democrat or Republican thing, it's just an observation. But as the United States finds itself more into a great power competition with China, that also provides opportunities in the region. The Chinese investment in Djibouti is about 10 times more than the American investment. And the Americans have become a little bit dependent on Djibouti just with regard to our military presence there after 2002 in Camp Lemonnier. Now, especially after recent tensions with Turkey, between the United States and Turkey, and one of the things that's always prevented a more proactive American policy towards Turkey has been the presence of the Incirlik Air Base. We didn't want to lose that base. People are starting to say maybe we do need to be a little bit more proactive. If China wanted to, the Americans could get pressured out of Djibouti overnight, then where would we be? And this leads us to look more and more reactively towards Berbera. Now, I used to teach American political history at Yale University. And one of the first ice-breaking questions I'd ask my students was, what is your earliest political memory? What's ancient history? And it would be 10 years ago. Now, the difference between the American mindset and the mindset in many places throughout the world is Americans, 10 years ago is ancient history for us, but we think nothing about moving 1,000 kilometers away. But elsewhere in the world, recent history is 1,000 years ago, and no one's going to want to move 10 kilometers away. The point of this is most Americans don't remember our presence in Berbera. I mean, NASA had a presence there. In the latter part of the Cold War, we had a presence there, and therefore it's useful. A lot of people forget that the United States recognized Somaliland in 1960, as did all the other Security Council members at the time. So part of my advice would just be to make that historical case as well. One final point, and this derives from a question which we heard in the last panel, but which was unanswered, was how do you encourage governments to encourage business by making clear that by decreasing risk? And this is something I care deeply about, even though I work at a nonprofit and I'm not a businessman. This past July, for example, I spent in northeastern Syria. I spent about 2 years of my life in Iraqi Kurdistan. I go frequently to the Western Sahara and also to Taiwan. The point is, and I often testify as an expert witness in court cases. And one of the issues when it comes to risk, just my advice is, there is absolutely no reason in precedent, even if Somaliland doesn't have diplomatic recognition, why it can't be differentiated. So for example, when it comes, from an American perspective, when it comes to travel warnings, if Iraqi Kurdistan is treated differently in our State Department travel warnings than the rest of Iraq, if Taiwan is treated differently, frankly, than China, there's no reason why Somaliland can't be treated differently than the remainder of Somalia when it comes to travel warnings. And then if you have a separate travel warning, then you can go to insurance companies and so forth and say, well, why the discrepancy? What I'm trying to say is, this is just one example, and I'll stop to give the rest of the panel time, but it's one example where precedent exists to have a procedure to get, everyone knows where we want to be, or where you want to be, but to do the step A, B, C, D, and E within the government bureaucracies, to have them treat Somaliland differently, even if no one is prepared at this point in time to go the extra step. We've done it with Iraqi Kurdistan, where the Americans have a consulate. We've done it in Taiwan, where the Americans have an office we don't recognize. We had an ambassador in northeastern Syria until quite recently, even though most people didn't recognize it. There is precedent there, and I'd urge Somaliland to make that case, not just on the economic aspect, but on the national security aspect, because it's all tied together.